Alright, so I took a picture of the Attitudes logo. I had it up on my desktop screen, and we're about to see if this works. I bought this from a retro store here in town, and I think I have everything set up right. Okay, that is pretty cool. Alright, hi Kaizen fans, Josh here as always, co-founder, lead game designer. And this week for Game Design 101 I wanted to do something a little differently paced because we're still working on some content for you for Shared Soul and Burst. We're also kind of in run-around panic mode right now because we're getting ready to head out to Spokane Sacred Heart Children's Hospital at the end of this week and do a PlayStation VR demonstration for them. And that kind of got me thinking about stuff because we've been kind of collecting stuff over the years. And part of it's fun because it's like the fun collecting retro stuff. Everyone loves that. But the other part of it is that we love teaching people with the equipment we get. And it's fun to show people how technology has evolved in entertainment in general, but also in that just broader sense of how technology moves forward. And so you saw that I started off today with this lovely piece of tech. This is actually my Game Boy from way back in the 90s, which is why it's kind of beat up. Like you can see that the number to call Nintendo on the back is very worn down. As for the Game Boy camera and the Game Boy printer, I got them from a retro game store here in town. And that was actually the first time I tested them, so I was really happy that when I wired everything up and put batteries in, which 6 batteries just to run the printer, which is like crazy, it's what runs on a Game Gear, like that everything worked out pretty cool and I was able to print that logo to kick off the video with. But this gives you an idea of how technology's been evolving. I'll probably grab my Game Gear here in a second to show you too, but the reason we like to teach people about this is not only in the sense of preserving history, because let's be honest here, our industry is getting slowly better, especially with the advent of things like the NES Mini and SNES Mini and Xbox and PlayStation selling retro games on their storefronts. But still, in a lot of ways as an industry, we kind of suck at preserving our history, and we need to be better at that. And also in the other sense of when people want to think up game design ideas and like trying to think of how they could make something their own, a lot of times people get lost and panicked, especially like we see this in our game design camps all the time, where you'll hand kids the creative tools, like, for instance, Little Big Planet or the upcoming Dreams or Minecraft or Gary's Mod, whatever you hand them, and if you just say, hey, here you go create something, they just draw a blank and freak out, and they think that this terrible mistake that it's that they're not creative, which is not true at all. Like, what the deal is that they're just not thinking out how they can use the standards of the medium they're working in to build something that they can then further take and make their own. So we like to teach the history of the whole, the technological advancement on both the software and hardware side, so that they can have that foundation and realize that maybe they could start by recreating, a classic arcade game. Like a lot of people, when they first get good at Little Big Planet, love to remake games like Pac-Man or Donkey Kong. And then once you build those basic steps, you can start to get in your mind of, okay, here's how I would take the parts of that game I like, here's how I would remix it, here's how I make something new, and that's how it ends up evolving. So I decided to kind of do that today, and like I said, on both a hardware and software side. So with the hardware side, things, especially if you take entertainment as a whole medium, like including pictures and movies and stuff, it's been an interesting process with the introduction of video games, because the whole point of bringing video games into the mix was to take a passive art form where you sit there and enjoy the picture or enjoy the movie and make the audience an active participant. So it's been a very interesting way to see things go, because, for instance, when you talk about technology that many people think is new, like when you go to a theater and put on 3D glasses for, those 3D IMAX movies, that's actually technology that's upwards 200 years old, and we were lucky enough to get a piece that works off of that. This is an 1800s stereoscope. I'm being very careful with this, but this is a children's toy from the 1800s that operates off of 3D technology. So you can see it like that. People would put their head up to there, and they'd look at these different cards, and the cards operate off of basic 3D principles that we still use today. So there's the card there, and then on the back they'd have an informational paragraph about what you were seeing. And the way that the information works and why 3D technology is able to fool your brain to see depth is that when you're looking through these windows and seeing these individual split pictures, these pictures look the same if you just look at the postcard like this, but if you look through here you'll realize that each of those postcards is just slightly different from each other. They're presenting a slightly different view, one for the left eye, and I tapped my right eye, one for the right eye, one for the left eye, and then once you see them both, your brain puts them together and creates the illusion of 3D depth. And that technology is still exactly how it's done today. And this specific piece right here, and like I said, you know, this one's really old. Like, we were really lucky to get this, and this is part of the reason why I want to do this stream, because I love showing this off and teaching with this, but I'm scared to have it in camps because it's actually kind of flimsy wood, and I don't want to risk breaking it and losing the ability to teach with it. But that technology that was behind the Stereoscope evolved into a children's classic, the Viewmaster. And when you see the Viewmaster, it has all those pictures around the edge. And actually, if you look and hold it up to the light, you'll realize that there's doubles, that there's a left and a right for each picture. So that way when you come up to the current picture, it's showing basically the same picture to both windows, but just slightly altered so that they appear in 3D. So when you go like that, you see the depth of something, even though it's two flat images being presented to your brain. And then it does the same thing as the postcard, where it does a little information in the window. And a lot of people connect with it when we show them the Viewmaster, and they're like, oh my god, so that's where it came from. I'm like, yeah, you know, it got popular in like the 60s and 70s and stuff, and is still popular through today, but it didn't really start then. It started many, many, many years earlier, and it is actually very old technology. But both of these would be examples of passive, and even with filming, like we're lucky enough that a group called Views, they're part of a group called Humanize out of Israel, donated us a virtual reality camera that you can see that it has two lenses on each side, and it films in 360 and 3D, and so on each side, one of those lenses is for your left eye, one of them is for your right eye. And it's the same idea, that because once you film two different versions like that, it presents to the brain in such a way that our brains put them together. So still, at the end of the day with all that, that's passive. You know, that's someone sitting there and enjoying it, which in the case of Views, we actually have worked with them on a tiny tech demo. And well, I'll talk to my programmer and see if we can put it up for you guys. But we did a tech demo where I went and filmed the inside of a C-130 aircraft, and we put some interactive elements up that you could interact with just to see how we can mix live film video with video game elements. And I'll talk to my programmer and see about getting that available to you all. But at the end of the day, though, primarily that's passive. You're sitting there enjoying the photograph. You're sitting there enjoying the video that was filmed in 3D. And when you start to add video game elements is when things start to get crazy when you're talking about tech-like cameras, because, you know, for instance, the Game Boy camera was probably one of the earliest forays into it. And you can kind of play with the photographs you can take. You can do stuff that, you know, what we would call selfie filters today. And, I mean, like, again, it was very basic, but just really kind of groundbreaking for the 90s, because people never thought about how a camera could play into games. And then shortly after that, on the PlayStation 2, you had the advent of the iToy, which actually not only lets you manipulate photos and have a little bit of fun with them and create animations, but it also actually can integrate you into games. Like, I will never forget the day that they set one of these up on a demo unit in our local GameStop. It had a demo running where there was like these bubbles bouncing around, and as we walked in, Trevor was so excited that he could bounce the bubbles on screen that he wasn't looking around, and actually backhanded me and nearly took me down to the floor. So definitely a little bit of trauma there, but it goes back to that, you know, this is just starting to get things to the point where it's starting to get a little more interactive. And then even with things like I'll be showing you a little bit more of my 3DS later, but with the 3DS, when you're playing it, especially the new 3DS, I don't know if I can't remember if the older 3DSs had it or not, but to present its 3D tech, it actually has two cameras here that track your face and make sure that the two images that it's presenting on the screen are lined up in such a way that your right eye sees one part and your left eye sees the other part, and the illusion you see is 3D depth. So even that is, again, creating like the interactivity of the filmed footage. So I also wanted to show you guys too, because all this technology, starting with the Stereoscope, leads to kind of the hot trend today, which is virtual reality. And virtual reality is just the Stereoscope or the Viewmaster pumped up to the next level. I have two different headsets to show you. This one is kind of a, I believe it was a $20 headset from Walmart. We just popped an old cell phone in there. We use this to demo at shows. And we put a phone in it that has like the demo that I mentioned, the C130 demo that, again, I'll try to make sure I can make available to everyone. It's a free demo. But this one features what they call inside-out technology, which means that when we're talking about people viewing stuff in virtual reality, it's no longer just like the Viewmaster or the Stereoscope, in the sense that when you have the Viewmaster and Stereoscope up here like this, no matter where I move my head, it's the same image. The image just stays static. But obviously when you're in a virtual reality world, when you move around, you're seeing different aspects of the world. So you have to know how fast your player's head is moving, where they're looking at, what they're changing direction to. And with an inside-out approach, it means that it's using the accelerometer of the phone and the motion sensor of the phone to know where the player's looking, which can be really easy to implement for phone-based VR. The downside is if you want to go with really complex games and experiences, the technology is starting to catch up, but it's not quite there yet to match the other kind, which is the kind that PlayStation VR uses, which is outside in. Outside in means that there's some outside source that's tracking the headset. In the case of PlayStation VR, you set a PlayStation camera up on your TV, which is like the natural advancement of iToy, and also Xbox's Kinect. It's a two-camera system that tracks your living room in full 3D space, and when your PlayStation VR headset is on, these little opaque areas glow blue, and there's even two of them on the back. And that enables it so that it can track it in full 3D space, and the same thing is done with HTC Vive and Oculus Rift, where you have to set up little sensors that track the headset, and that outside-in approach is a little more effective right now. And again, they're constantly evolving this tech. It's constantly moving forward, so eventually we may get to a point where it's all inside-out approaches. And that's part of the evolution of the whole design process. But the whole point is that right now, having an external camera tracking it is a much better option, and it, not to mention that it also allows you to live stream to Twitch while you're playing. And it's crazy to think about and show people and teach them about how, playing with imagery and how people see stuff through lenses and whether or not they can manipulate it went from an 1800s stereoscope to the Viewmaster of the 60s to the Game Boy camera to the iToy, and then on to things like PlayStation VR and the Nintendo 3DS, or even the Switch. I don't have a Switch right now. Hopefully probably will get one someday. But the Nintendo Switch has a camera in the bottom of one of the Joy-Cons, and we were at a student's house who's one of the kids that takes our camps, and he was showing us how you could take a picture of your hand and it would turn it into a bike track in a game. So that's, again, back to that, giving the player more options to get control of the imagery and work with it. So with that regard, I'm going to go ahead and swap and start showing stuff about software. So let's get on to do that side of the stream. Alright, so before we get fully into doing the software side of it, I did realize I mentioned I'd show you my Game Gear. And here, I'm going to pull it out because I'm realizing the shadows here are probably not friendly to the camera. This is also the Game Gear I've had since the 90s, although the TV tuner at the top is new. I got that from a retro store. Well, I guess new is a relative word here. But anyways, like I mentioned, that that printer takes 6 batteries. So does the Game Gear. Yeah, this thing chewed through batteries. You were lucky to get 3 or 4 hours out of it, which is why down there I have a nifty little power cord for when I want to play my Game Gear games. But this would be another way that, technology's been evolving too, because back in the 90s we were all blown away that you could turn a game system into a full functioning TV with this TV tuner. And I never had it in the 90s. I just knew people who did and was so jealous of it. And then when I had a chance to get one, I was like, well, hey, it's a chance to preserve history. And nowadays, no, it's nothing for systems like the 3DS, the Vita, the Switch to, sign into YouTube. And we can watch internet videos on demand. We can watch Netflix. And it's just a crazy thing to think about how far we've come. When, again, back in the 90s, it was just wicked that you could slap a TV tuner into your Game Gear and completely transform it into a working TV. I knew one guy who used this port, which I guess there was an extra cord you could get, and he used some additional accessories to play his Sega Genesis on his Sega Game Gear using his Game Gear as a TV. So awesome to see how much technology has marched forward. But anyways, let's go ahead and start doing it on the software side, and we're going to start with a little thing that's really good to know about if you're wanting to develop your own games inside of like level creators like Mario Maker or Little Big Planet, and that is a little thing called breadcrumbing, which is a wider part of what's called inductive learning. So let's go ahead and check that out. Alright, so here's an example of breadcrumbing. Breadcrumbing is using goodies and power-ups such as coins in Mario, bubbles in Little Big Planet, Wumpa Fruit in Crash Bandicoot to lead your player where you want them to go or to lead them to an area that's more beneficial for them. It's a way of teaching that's called inductive teaching, where instead of putting up a sign that says, hey, you should go here, you instead use subtle hints to get the player to discover it and learn it for themselves. In a bit, I'll swap the video to my 3DS too, because one of the best examples of breadcrumbing ever is in Super Mario Bros. 3. It's actually a very infamous example. It's one of the first ones I ever remember from my childhood. But here's a quick demo of it. So let's say as a player I'm coming up on a path where there's two potential ways. And keep in mind that in a normal game we would design the camera so you couldn't see the end results there. As the designer, I put the breadcrumbs, the little point bubbles. That makes the player go, oh, I want to go down there. And that leads them to the area where they're safe instead of getting crushed to death by the big, scary weapon. So that's one way that breadcrumbing can be used. And in a bit, we'll flip to Crash Bandicoot 2. And I'll show you how on Crash Bandicoot they used breadcrumbing in a somewhat similar way, but in a way that was actually very strongly tied to the game design in some of the most tense levels of that game. Alright, so what we're going to show here, and let me turn down the volume a little bit, is one of the most well-known examples of breadcrumbing, a very well-known game design technique, in World 1-1 of Mario Bros. 3. The level starts off like normal. But then has this area. And this is where the breadcrumbing example is. Let me get rid of this guy. So when you get to the end here, and I'm just going to make sure I'm still in frame, you see those coins that you can really only jump to reach one, so obviously you have to do a running jump, and that running jump fills up your P meter, and you can then fly up there and find out stuff up there. The thing is, the game never told you before that you could fly when you get the P meter all the way up while having a raccoon skin on, or the Tanuki suit on. So in order, I'm sorry for chewing on my words there, by setting it up like that, where you had to do that running jump that was obviously going to be long enough to get you the P meter full, and then do a jump like that, it like inductively taught you that doing that would cause you to fly. And we'll get to the end of the level here, but that is one way which breadcrumbing works to help make the game a little bit easier on your player, where you're not bombarding them with tutorials, but instead of that, you're providing them with opportunities to test out new skills and discover skills, so that when they discover it, it's more memorable to them, because everyone remembers the first time in Mario Bros. 3 where they realized they could fly like that, And that's a lot more memorable than a text box in your face telling you could do something. So it's a thing to keep in mind when designing games of your own, that some stuff you need to do with a text box, that's unavoidable, but other things you can have your players discover if you design it right, and when they discover it, it'll be that much more memorable to them and that much more impactful, and it won't be another text box that they have to remember. Alright, so if you grew up in the 90s like me, playing Crash Bandicoot was mostly a great experience, except for these levels. These levels were frickin' notorious. But they're a great example of breadcrumbing and how breadcrumbing can be used as a game design, not only to teach your players like hidden skills that they could learn, like the P meter in Mario Brothers 3, but also to lead them to safety, like I illustrated in Little Big Planet. In this case, that's exactly how breadcrumbing is used. It's a mechanic to get you to safety, because in these levels, like most Crash Bandicoot levels, are very friendly with how they're designed in terms of camera and movement, but these specific levels, there's about 2 of them in every Crash Bandicoot game, have you running into the camera away from danger, whether it's a boulder or a polar bear, similar things like that. And the Wumpa fruit you'll see is used to guide me away from danger. So usually they have you do one time like that just to get used to the concept of it. And I'm making sure to get as many lives as I can, because now they're going to probably introduce the dangers. Because in a bit they'll start using Wumpa fruit to guide me out of the way of gates and stuff like that. That would slow me down and get me hit by the boulder. I'd say probably at this time right here. And the Wumpa fruit will also lead you to the correct places to jump often. Like that. So if I keep following the Wumpa fruit, which is effectively the breadcrumbing path, it will keep me out of the way of those gates that would otherwise slow me down enough to get hit by the boulder. Which, if you told me 20 years ago that I'd finally get good enough to be able to clear that without dying, I would not have believed you. But that's another way you can use breadcrumbing, and like I said, it's an old game design thing that's been around since forever. Mario 3 wasn't necessarily the game that invented it, although it was one of the ones that definitely mastered the use of breadcrumbing, but it's still something used to this day, so it's still something to think about when designing your levels and worlds, of using positive rewards to get players to do what you want them to do in order to survive and thrive in the game world. Another way that games have evolved over time is in their approach to difficulty. Many games were designed with this older idea in mind of you basically had to build up your skill to get all the way to the end of the game, which meant that if you were dying a lot towards the end or towards the middle, you would have to replay the beginning parts of the game a lot, get parts that you had already mastered, in order to get to the end and hopefully eventually see the complete experience. So let's say you built a course like this. If you wanted to have it old style, it would mean that we'd have to be careful and judge our jumps and get around all of these features. And let's say I made a mistake right here. That would mean I'd have to start all over again and, try to get through everything that I had already mastered. For some players, this was a level of eliteness. Like, they love showing off that they can do that. And like, for instance, you have people that will spend time getting to the point where they can do all of the Dark Souls games without taking a single hit, that kind of stuff. But for most of your players, it can end up being very frustrating and pushing them to the point where they decide to maybe go play something else, or thinking that they're not good enough for it. So one thing you can do is add a checkpoint. So I'm going to pull a lever here, and it's going to activate a checkpoint over there. And I'm going to miss this first one because I don't want to accidentally reactivate that checkpoint. But see that from that roof, that checkpoint dropped down, and that checkpoint is now active. So if I make a mistake, I now come out there, and the stuff I've already mastered and I'm already good at, I don't have to do again. I just have to worry about that element that I'm learning how to get around. Let's see if it'll hit me there. Okay, cool. So this is important because old school games had a lot of great levels and a lot of great content on them, but in some cases, like Crash Bandicoot 1, they got so ridiculously hard towards the end that it ended up acting as a barrier to some players who either had a hard time developing the skills required to get to the end, or if you're talking about players, for instance, that have dexterity issues, that like for whatever reason their hands just don't respond as well, or they have injuries that they're living with, that they couldn't do all the fancy footwork necessarily to get to the end. I remember Mark Cerny, who was one of the lead developers working with Naughty Dog at the time on Crash Bandicoot as well as the Spyro games, that he said in the original Crash Bandicoot that there was instances where players had to perform upwards 45 to 50 correct jumps between checkpoints in the level, and that makes it very hard on the player. So if you think about when you're designing your game of ways to have challenge present but also to have respite for your players, where they can get some help, where if they're doing certain parts right and are just having to learn how to do a certain part, have it so that they can focus more on learning that certain part and learning the skill you want them to learn, instead of getting trapped into redoing the stuff they've already done over and over and over again, which could lead to frustration and burnout on behalf of your player. Alrighty, so we're playing Crash Bandicoot, actually the Crash Bandicoot Insane Collection, which is the remasters of them, where they rebuilt the game from the ground up. And this is a beloved game from my childhood, but this level right here illustrates how older games had really steep difficulty curves. And like, for instance, the only way to move forward through this game is you had to get through this level called the High Road, and it involves the most ridiculous jumps that you can imagine. I can only get a part way through it, and as you can see, those boards fall through, so you have split-second timing. The level starts off pretty brutal right there, and so that created a problem for people who couldn't get through the level. Like, back in the 90s, people could put on what's called a Game Shark, which allowed them to cheat and trick the game into thinking they had already beat the level. But that's not an option available to everyone, and that meant that you had to get through a lot of precision jumps just to get to the point of being able to move on, because other levels, even the other harder levels in this game, were not this difficult. And then, of course, I just lost the ability to do that. And I just did a cheat right there where I bounced off of the turtle. But you can see that I'm not doing that great, and I know that someone's going to be up in the comments and going, oh, you just need to get good. And yeah, haha, I'm not that great at it. But the point is that if you got past this level, there was a lot of extra great levels past it, and there was a lot of great experiences that had a somewhat better checkpoint system. But people saw that there was a kind of a drop-off, that once people got to levels like the High Road, they just couldn't cut it. And I'm having a hard time cutting it while I'm talking too, but I've tried a couple different times on the remaster to get past it, and I've unfortunately not been that successful. But at least I was able to get all the way through Crash 2 and 3, because Crash 2 and 3, like I said, they did some extra testing on it to make sure that it was a little bit easier for people to play. So you can see I'm doing a little bit better there. So there I got to a checkpoint. And so you can get through it. It is fairly difficult. I have one friend on, or actually two friends on Facebook that are both just straight up insane at this game and have recorded speed runs of this. But I'm not even going to attempt a speed run. But the point is that if you have a section of the game like that that's hard and it's not optional, it's not something to get a goodie or a treasure, it can create a scenario where your fans get left out. You know, that some people who really enjoyed the game up to that point are getting turned off because they've hit a roadblock that is based on difficulty. And so it's good to think things out, like either your checkpoint placement or take harder experiences like this and make them optional. For instance, even in the development of Crash Bandicoot 1, there was a level that they made called Stormy Castle or Stormy Night, I can't remember which one is the name, but it was a ridiculously hard level that ended up getting cut because of its difficulty. And in the remaster for Crash Bandicoot, they decided to make it a DLC bonus level that you could download and experience at your leisure without having to complete having to get past it to get to the end of the game. So stuff like that, where people can show off their skills on Twitch and YouTube, that's great, as long as it's not like a requirement to get through the whole experience.
All right, lastly, this ties into my Game Design 101 Planet Point we gave a while ago, but this is back to risk versus reward. If you're going to ask your player to do something hard, make sure that there's something worth it for them in the end, so that way they feel like they've accomplished something and not just a mundane task. So, for instance, if the player's coming up here and they see that there's two paths, one that is obviously scary and the other that's nice and hilly and yay, happy times, make it so that if they choose to do the hard thing, that there is something worth it for them in the end. So let's see if we can get past these. And now that I've gotten past all the bad stuff, I get all the reward. And so if people chose the easy path, they can still continue on with the game. They're still on a path towards completing the story. But the people who do the hard stuff will get the extra goodies. And I mean, if you really want to go super old school, they could even have a percentage counter where if someone sees 100% of the game, they get the true ending, which was true for the Crash Bandicoot. I only know for at least Crash Bandicoot 1. If you absolutely went down every single secret path, you got a final true ending to the game. And so this helps show how even on the software side, people would have ideas and those ideas would get refined over time. So when you got to games like Little Big Planet and the modern Mario games that are in 3D, they didn't completely invent everything from scratch. They were still taking these old ideas that were present in games from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and just reimagining them and taking what worked and while ditching what didn't or refining what didn't. So in the case of, for instance, Crash Bandicoot, and I'm sure I'll cover this during the Crash Bandicoot footage too, when people found out that Crash Bandicoot 1 was ridiculously hard, Sony and Naughty Dog didn't ditch what they had. You know, they knew that they had a good thing in Crash, but what they ended up having to do is figuring out what worked and what didn't. So in the case of making Crash Bandicoot 2, they famously had testers play the game while they had cameras mounted on the TVs, and the cameras would film the players and see where they were getting repeatedly like dead or frustrated, or if there was parts where they were really happy and having a blast, and they would take the parts where they were having a good time and made those the touchstone that every other part of the game was judged by, and they'd take the parts where people were getting frustrated and ready to break the controller, and they'd add in extra checkpoints or add in different features to make it so that those sections were easier to work around and engage with. And so that's kind of what we're going at here, is that technology from both the software side and the hardware side are constantly evolving. And so if you take time to learn about that evolution and how this all happened, you can then take some of those ideas and incorporate them into your own game design concepts, and that can help break that writer's block that a lot of people have when they first get their hands on game design tools. Like, oh god, what do I do? Well, go study some history. Go study how Mario was made, how Crash was made, how Little Big Planet got here, how Halo started. Study all these different games, and in the process of learning how they overcame their writer's block and how they learned from the past, you can then learn from the past and start building your own exciting game design projects. So I'll flip back and forth between Crash Bandicoot and this as well, but hopefully this gives you some idea of how you can move your game projects forward with this kind of knowledge. Alright, so here's an example of what I'm talking about harder paths being optional. If I wanted to continue on with this path in Crash Bandicoot, the main story as I just jump forward along those lily paths, but since I collected 3 of the symbols of Crash's girlfriend, it opened up this alternate path that is just a bonus area, so we're going to go ahead and take it. And it just said there that failing bonus areas does not cost a life, so you're free to retry them as much as you want. So that's another way that you can get players to engage with the bonus area, basically. So see, I failed right there. And that's obviously kind of a hard area, but it just drops me back here. So again, there's that risk and reward thing, where if I want to do the hard thing, I have to be willing, or if I want to get the reward, I have to be willing to engage with a hard thing. But also at the same time, in this case, they were smart enough to make sure that the main game didn't require me to get through that hard part just to continue on. So let's see if I can pull this off. And see, there was 2 prizes up there at the end. I'll try one more time just for the sake of the video. But this gives you an idea that this hard part, they could have put this in the main game and made it so that you had to get through this part just to continue the story. But that would have definitely made it so that a lot of people who might like the game might not be able to actually clear it. Whereas the bonus area, it's more of an elite thing. You get goodies for it. But you're not penalized if you're not good at it. You're allowed to keep retrying this area without massive penalties of being set back. So now we've got our reward and we can go back. And that was actually a really well designed challenge because I was not penalized for failing it. I was just offered that opportunity to constantly retry it until I got good at it. And then once I got it and got the reward, I can move on with the story. Which in this case includes getting to the end of the level and going back to the map in order to continue my story through Crash Bandicoot. So that's how you design a good challenge. And that's actually from the first Crash Bandicoot, which is a game that's notoriously bad for hard challenges, but there was times where they really strongly nailed what a good challenge is, where you give players that opportunity to earn a goodie, but you make sure that it's not a massive roadblock that prevents people from moving on in general.
So that's it for this Game Design 101 Kaizencast, everyone. Thanks for joining. And like I said, I just wanted to do something a little different and show a little bit of how we're trying to expand what we're teaching with both modern and retro tech. We will have some more videos coming up this week, including some Planet Coaster hangouts and also a review of our OpSeat chairs. Absolutely love these things. And actually, as you can see, we've built an entire gaming desk. We took an old industrial desk I had that was this nasty tan, and Trevor was kind enough to spray paint an outer space theme for me so you could see the flecks of paint and the outer space with the black, blues, and purples. Hidden planets. There's one planet there with a PlayStation spinner meant to be like a satellite for it. Another planet there. And we are going to have a video at some point soon, probably next week or the week after, where Trevor and Jeff, our accounting guy, will show you how to do this kind of spray paint art. There's a moon. But, yeah, so basically, like I keep driving home throughout this broadcast, is that if you learn about the art form of gaming from both the software evolution side and the hardware evolution side, sometimes it can help you get a grasp more of where you fit into the industry. So for instance, like when we talk about Shared Soul, we talk about it playing off of games that inspired us in the 90s, like Ballerina Toshinden and Bloody Roar, or with Burst, how we talk about how games like Dance Dance Revolution inspired it. And if you look at Shared Soul, it's very different from 90s fighting games. It obviously has its own soul, and same thing with Burst. Burst is obviously very different than DDR, but still has its own soul and all that. But learning from the past and learning from how the art form evolved for rhythm games and fighting games helped us find that initial footing that we could build our unique experiences off of. And that helped demystify the process of learning how to create art in this really awesome industry. So I hope you enjoyed the stream, and thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night.